Thank you so much for you guys for coming back. So we'll continue here with the gold standard versus free silver. So, as I was saying before the break, William Jennings Bryan and the populace will rally behind this idea of free silver. At this time, the United States is on the gold standard, and Republicans, financiers, bankers, and industrialists will all support the gold standard. Now, why is this? Well, when we say the gold standard, it means that the value of our money is compared to its value in gold. And gold would make the money more valuable. However, because it's more valuable, there will be less money in circulation. So, because of that, it keeps prices low, and the value of the money will increase. There's less of it, and it's more valuable. But it also means that fewer people have money, but the money is worth much more. So, this is why people want to keep the country on the gold standard because it means that the money will be worth more, but people have less of it. Okay. Now, silver. Silver will be supported by farmers and laborers and people who owe debts. So, with bimetallism, what it will do is put more money in circulation. However, the problem with this is that there's more money in circulation, but the money is less valuable. So, because of that, prices have to rise to accommodate this. So let's say under the gold standard, my lucky I'm not feeling very worky today mug is $3. Well, let's say, yeah, under the gold standard, it's $3. But under the silver standard, this might have to go up to be worth the same thing. So, this, because more people might have money and there's more money in circulation, but the money is worth less, this mug may now become $6 or $7 or $10. However, because more people have this money, the idea is that it makes it easier to pay off debts because people will have the physical money in their hand. They'll be able to pay off debts easier. However, prices have to rise to accommodate the value of the money going lower. We see this, or I see this often when I'm traveling to different countries. So, for example, if I go to, say, Japan. I went to Japan recently. So, or China. I went to China a few years ago. Something may be on sale for like 1,000 of their currency, but it may only be like $10. It's because there's more money in circulation, but the money is worth less. Okay. So we'll continue. If you have any questions, send me an email. Thank you. So in 1896, we're in a presidential election year. And remember, Democrats and populists have all kind of rallied behind William Jennings Bryan. Republicans will nominate William McKinley. Republicans in their platform will say, look, we need to keep gold because gold is stable and it's secure. Okay. In the end, in the election of 1896, William McKinley will win. William Jennings Bryan will lose. He'll go on to run a couple of more times for president, and he'll lose both of those. But in about 1912, he will become, I want to say, the Secretary of State. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that. In 1897, I would say, as a move to secure themselves, the Dingley Tariff of 1897 will be passed. Republicans largely at this time will be for high protective tariffs. This tariff that's passed really as soon as, or not long after McKinley is in office, not only will raise tariffs, but it will raise the cost of living by about 25%. So people will have to pay more just to live and survive. And then in 1900, the Gold Standard Act is passed, which stops bimetallism. And this was something that I included in your chapter because I just thought it was really interesting. It's a great analogy for the election of 1896, The Wizard of Oz. And I'm not talking about the movie, which, yes, was amazing. I'm talking about the book, which was written by L. Frank Baum. So, the Wizard of Oz was created as a commentary for the election of 1896. So the Emerald City, where Dorothy and her gang of animals and live action scarecrows and things are trying to get to, symbolizes Washington D.C. And the wizard is William McKinley. And the only way to get to Washington D.C. is on what? The yellow brick road. It's the color of gold, right? And Dorothy in the original does not wear ruby slippers. That is something that was made for the movie version. In the book, Dorothy is prancing along the yellow brick road in silver shoes. But the only way to get to the Emerald City, aka Washington, D.C., is to trod on the road of gold. So that was pretty interesting to me. All right, so now we will switch, or I'll say, not necessarily, it's all in the chapter, but we will change gears and we'll go to the segregated South. This is very important. When we are talking about US history, it's almost like when we're talking about the North and the South, it's almost like you're dealing with two separate nations. But at this time, remember, we're not that far removed from the Civil War. So, yes, it is very much like you're into different nations. So, if we recall, after Reconstruction ends in 1877, Democrats who will call themselves redeemers because they feel that they are or they have redeemed the South from the horrors of Reconstruction. Okay. So redeemers will be back in power. Southern Democrats, old Confederates will go back in power. And remember, with populism, it fails in the South because Black and white farmers are not able to come together because of racial antagonism. So it really will open the door. The failure of populism in the South will open the door for the imposition of a new racial order in the South, or dare I say, really, the resurrection of a very old racial order in the South. Redeemers, by the time we get to the Gilded Age, by the time we get to the age of populism, they have removed a lot of Reconstruction's progress. During Reconstruction, it's known as being an era where African Americans make tremendous gains, both socially and politically. So during Reconstruction, African Americans will gain the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, or African American men will gain the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. And when African Americans are able to vote, a lot of them will vote largely Republican. um, African Americans will also make these tremendous political gains where they will serve at every level, really, political office. They'll serve as mayors and governors. 14 African Americans will be elected to the House of Representatives during Reconstruction. Two African Americans will be elected to the Senate during Reconstruction. But by 1877, and really before 1877, but really by 1877, Redeemers are back in power and they have really removed a lot of the progress that's made by Reconstruction. The One of the nation's first terrorist organizations, the Ku Klux Klan, has come to power, and without the protection of the federal government, without the protection of the army, um, there's this terror is allowed to reign. And so by this time, during Reconstruction and after Reconstruction, there are codes called Black codes that are in law. Black codes are laws that were created by these new Southern governments or by these redeemers that attempted to regulate the everyday lives of the formerly enslaved. And so, under Black codes, Black people could be arrested for almost anything. One of the most trivial laws, in my opinion, were called vagrancy laws. And each southern state had its own black codes, but vagrancy laws seem to be pretty universal. A vagrancy law stated that if you could not prove that you had a job, you may have a job, but if you cannot prove it, then you can be sent to jail. So, with these black codes, African American men, especially, were sent to jail for almost anything. And it's during this time, after Reconstruction, that we get a system called the convict leasing system. The convict leasing system really is defined as the profitable leasing out of prisoners to businesses. So every southern state essentially sold or leased out a portion of its convicted criminals to businessmen. And so it's mostly black men who are convicted of minor offenses, such as vagrancy or not stepping off of the sidewalk when a white person came. Or looking a white person in the eye, because every state had its own separate laws and black codes. So in these prisons, the conditions were often incredibly barbaric. There was a lot of disease. There was a lot of high death rates. And most of the time, people were put in prison and their families wouldn't know where they were. One of the most famous, I would say, prisons that participated in convict leasing is, or was, well, no, is the Louisiana State Penitentiary, which was known colloquially as Angola. It was known as Angola because during the time of slavery, a lot of its enslaved people came from Angola. And so this prison was often known as Angola. This was also a time of intense segregation in the South. However, this segregation leads to the creation of a unique Black urban life. Um, so it really also supported the growth of a Black middle class. So during this time, segregation is so intense that Black children cannot go to school with white children. They have to be taught by Black teachers. If you are sick, you have to go to a Black doctor. If you need a lawyer, you have to go to a Black lawyer. In the South, segregation was so complete that the races were even segregated in death. So if you are Black and a member of your family dies, you cannot go to a white undertaker or a white funeral parlor. You have to go to a Black funeral parlor that will bury you in a Black cemetery because segregation is complete. So complete, in fact, that even in death, the races have to be separate. And so, because of this, there ends up being this foundation of a Black middle class. So, you have Black teachers and Black physicians, Black lawyers, Black undertakers, and Black shopkeepers because you can't go to the white store to get what you need. You have to have your own Black urban life. There are some Black historians who even now will posit that segregation hurt the Black community because it led to the disintegration of a lot of Black businesses. Okay, but we're not there yet, and I could go off on a huge tangent talking about this. So I have to stay focused, guys. Keep me focused. Okay. The labor market at this time is also racially divided. So, Black men are often barred from supervisory positions in factories and in workshops because if they were in a supervisory position, that would disrupt the racial order. You can't have a Black man be over a white man because that can't happen in the social order. More Black than white women worked for wages, not necessarily because Black women liked to work. No, it was a necessity. Black women had to work to support their families. And at this time, Black women will do mostly domestic work. If you're interested in learning about Black domestics in the Jim Crow South, I have a couple of books for you. One is called Cooking in Other Women's Kitchens. If I remember, I'll put these books in the description box on YouTube. But one is called Cooking in Other Women's Kitchens. And I can't remember the name of the other one, but I will go get it from my bookshelf. Both of them are very interesting because they really open the door about what is going on with domestic work. Black women are in a very unique position because they exist in two worlds. So they exist, of course, in the Black world, in Black life, where they live, where they go to church, where they raise their children and their families. But they're also in this white world, but on the outskirts, because they're taking care of white children. They are cooking in white homes. They are seeing white people in their most comfortable state because you're most comfortable in your own home. And so they get a very unique perspective of white life. So if I remember, I'll either try to put it in the description box or I'll put it on your D2L link. Very, very good books to read. But I digress. Let's continue. And so because there are so few opportunities in the South, of course, there is sharecropping, but if you recall, that's a really financially exploitive system. It's a financially exploitative system. It is predatory. A lot of Blacks during this time will leave the South, really searching for better living and working conditions. Between 1879 and 1880, approximately between 40 and 60,000 African Americans will migrate to Kansas. They are looking for political equity. They're looking for freedom from violence and intimidation. They're looking for education and for economic opportunity. However, many of them will lack the capital, they'll lack the money that is needed to farm. And so many will become unskilled laborers in many of these towns and cities that they'll settle in. How most Blacks at this time will have no choice but to remain in the South. Jobs in the North at this time are refusing to hire Blacks. They don't need Black labor, they have immigrant labor. So they're not screaming for Black labor. It's really not until World War I that factories will begin to hire Blacks out of necessity. At this time of segregation, there's also a huge decline in Black political power. Democrats will redraw district lines in the South. There will be a lot of violence and intimidation in the polls. And between 1890 and 1906, nearly every southern state will enact some type of law or they'll put some type of constitutional amendment or provision meant to eliminate and restrict the Black vote. So there will be poll taxes that say you have to pay a fee in order to be able to vote. And a lot of the time, the fee was much too high. It could be a year of wages. There were also literacy tests where they might have you read the Constitution and say, what does this mean? Um, there was also something called the grandfather clause. The grandfather clause stated that if you were eligible to vote prior to the Civil War, so at this time it would have been someone's grandparent. If your grandfather could vote, you could vote. But for many Black Americans, the grandparents couldn't vote because prior to the Civil War, Black people were seen as property, not as people. And so the grandfather clause will eliminate a lot of the Black vote, especially in the South. It's so complete that by 1940, only 3% of adult Black Southerners are even registered to vote. So we really at this time see the birth of Jim Crow segregation. Jim Crow, it's called Jim Crow segregation because Jim Crow was a minstrel show character. Minstrel shows, Minstrel. Minstrel shows were shows that really made fun of Black people. They recreated and enhanced and endorsed Black stereotypes as being childlike and lazy and unintelligent. but it's named after a minstrel show. Segregation was part of an all encompassing system of white domination. And it's at this time that I'll introduce two types of segregation. The first one is de jure segregation, and this means segregation by the law. Segregation meaning it is written into the law. The law says that blacks and whites are to be kept separate. De facto segregation, on the other hand, is segregation by habit or by custom. In 1896, there is a court case known as Plessy versus Ferguson. Homer Plessy was a light-skinned black man. He buys a first-class ticket on a train car, and he is not able to be serviced. He is forced off of the train car and is arrested. Plessy versus Ferguson ends up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and this case says that facilities can be segregated as long as they don't discriminate, as long as the facilities are equal. So, what Plessy versus Ferguson does is it establishes separate but equal segregation. However, black and white facilities were never equal. If you look at a black water fountain during the Jim Crow era and a black water fountain and a white water fountain, you will see that they're not equal. If you look at black schools and white schools, you will see that they are not equal. The federal government even spent more money per white child than they did per black child during the Jim Crow era. So, what Plessy versus Ferguson does, however, is introduce an era of de jure segregation, or segregation that is enforced by the law, saying that it is okay to separate the facilities of blacks and whites as long as long as the facilities are equal, but the facilities are never equal. Now, states will react to the Plessy decision by passing a number of segregation laws that will impact daily life. Black facilities are markedly inferior. And there's also this development of a very elaborate social etiquette where everyone knows how to behave. This de facto segregation, where you segregate because it is the habit or the custom of the area that you live in. And if you challenged the social order, you were often met with violence. Okay, I will go on to part three in just a moment, and we'll begin with Booker T. Washington.